Hello, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's whole school or whole staff CPD on behaviour for learning. So we're carrying on with our theme from last half term about thinking about how we effectively manage behaviour for learning within lessons. And in particular, this afternoon, we are going to be looking at scripted interactions with students. So hopefully you will have had a chance to read the chapter that from Tom Bennett's book, Running the Room, about scripted interactions with students, and you would have had a chance to think about the interactions that you would like to write a script for. And really this afternoon is an opportunity to share with you some of the basic principles about script interactions, and also give you a chance to work collaboratively with each other to think about those situations where a script might be appropriate. So as always, we're just going to share with you the evidence base for this afternoon's session. So it's the same evidence base that we've been using for all our behaviour for learning training. So it's founded on the guidance from Ofsted, from the EEF and evidence-based education on on behaviour for learning and effective behaviour for learning, and that makes up the core of what we think about in flow, but also we're drawing on practitioner evidence from Tom Bennett, Bill Rogers, and then in this afternoon session we're going to be also looking at some of the work by Paul Dix, particularly from his book When the Adults Change, Everything Changes. And many would argue that Tom Bennett and Paul Dix have quite opposing views of how to manage behaviour within a classroom, but there are some fundamental principles which they both agree on, and scripting or scripted interactions is one of them, which is why I've used both of their writing to form the basis of this afternoon's CPD. So we're going to make a start with thinking about what a script is and sharing a definition with you. So this is taken from Tom Bennett's work, and he basically defines a script as the following: a pre-prepared set of actions and suggested set of phrases to say and do in order to cope with a potentially difficult situation as efficiently as possible. So if we think about some of the words in that definition, which are really, really important in terms of us understanding what a script is. So the idea that it is pre-planned and pre-prepared well in advance of the actual situation that you're going to need it in. It's not just a set of phrases, but it's also a set of actions. So it's what you're going to say and do in a situation. The idea is that you create these scripts to help you cope with potentially difficult situations or interactions. And the idea is that they allow you to get through that interaction or that situation as efficiently as possible, because of that understanding that actually your time is finite, a lesson time is finite, and you have a limited amount of time in which to actually deal with difficult situations, and you need to do that as efficiently as possible. So just reinforcing that, Tom Bennett would argue that you need to prepare scripted conversations well in advance so they allow you to say the right thing and do the right thing before you actually come across that situation. Okay, so that's just a definition of what a scripted interaction actually is. So just want to spend a little bit of time now thinking about why we would use scripts, and what do both Tom Bennett and Paul Dix say about why scripts are really, really helpful and important in a teacher's kind of day-to-day life. So Tom Bennett first, both Tom Bennett and Paul Dix talk about the idea that actually one of the fundamental reasons why scripts are really important is because when we are interacting in a professional capacity, or we are interacting in a professional relationship, relying on our instinct is not the most reliable or effective means of communication. Okay, so if we think about the relationships that we interact in our day-to-day lives in school, so we've got professional relationships with the students, with other teachers, with parents. If our default is to rely on our instinct and freewheeling, or kind of just thinking on our feet, it's not the most reliable form of communication. And the reason for that is because actually, if our instincts are determined by our emotions and how we're feeling. So if we're feeling confused and stressed and angry, tired or upset or nervous or anxious and any other range of emotions, we therefore rely on our instincts. And therefore, if we're reacting based on those instincts, we may not be conveying the message as well as we should be conveying. Okay, so hopefully that's quite obvious to people. But actually, relying on our instincts is not the most effective means of communication if we are interacting in a professional capacity. Tom Bennett then goes on to talk about, what scripts help us do and help us avoid. So the first thing is that they help us avoid freestyling or improvising, which therefore minimizes the chance of error that is created by relying on our instincts and thinking on our feet. And therefore, if we minimize the chance of error and we avoid freestyling and improvising, we are more likely to react efficiently and make good use of our time and get messages across in an efficient and effective way, rather than just thinking about what springs to mind and then potentially getting it wrong and potentially, going on and on about or using lots and lots of phrases to convey something to a child. If we have a script, we are more likely to get that message across succinctly and quickly and effectively than if we don't have a script. Tom Bennett then goes on to talk about the fact that actually what a script does is it supports new teachers, but also experienced teachers deal with situations they may not have come across, or situations that are new or potentially quite difficult or difficult to navigate, until you get a sense of what to do and what that might look like for yourself. So there will come a point where you have come across a situation numerous times, and you've made errors on the way, and you then know how to react in that situation. But ultimately, we will all come across students or parents or situations that we haven't come across before, and actually having a script that we can fall back on, even if we're an experienced teacher, really helps. I mean, I fall back on scripts all the time, because I'm constantly coming across situations that are new to me. So actually, it's not a weakness in my repertoire. It's actually a strength to know, okay, I've got this script in the back of my mind. If this doesn't go the way that I think it's going to go, I'm going to use this script. Or I'm not familiar with this situation, I'm going to use this script. And finally, what scripts do is they create that impression of you being calm, prepared, and focused, even if underneath you may not be. Okay, so if we think about what Tom Bennett and Paul Dix say at the beginning about, not relying on our instinct, because our instinct is informed by our emotions in a particular situation. If you have a script, you can actually give that appearance of being calm, prepared, and focused and in control, and it gives you the power to control that situation. So scripts are really helpful in terms of empowering teachers in difficult situations that could quite quickly escalate, but need not to if we can have a script to back us up. So that's just a couple of reasons provided by both practitioners about why the use of scripts is actually a really helpful and important strategy or mechanism for a teacher. Just want to give you now a little bit of guidance in terms of what a good script looks like, or what it should contain, and what it shouldn't contain, or what it should not be, or resort to, really. So a good script is, and these are 6 points made by Tom Bennett. So they should be short and definitive. Don't make them too short so that they omit essential information, but they should be short. They should be to the point. They should be clear, linear, and concrete. Importantly, they should be functional and objective rather than subjective and emotional. So, and they should be objective enough so that you can use them in lots of different situations with minimal tweaking. Both Tom Bennett and Paul Dix talk about the fact that they need to be planned, they need to be written out, and they need to be rehearsed and practiced beforehand in order to ensure that really strong delivery. And then finally, they both argue that scripts should be repeated in every situation. And Tom Bennett in particular talks about the fact that actually repeating a script in every situation gives clarity to the student and also gives certainty to that student, in the same way that a routine gives certainty to a student and creates that calmness in the lesson. A script also does that, and it de-escalates and diffuses situations, because the student eventually will get to the point where they know what's coming and it's not going to be new, and they're not and they know what to anticipate. So actually, for that reason, they're very similar to routines, and they're part of the routines and the norms that you establish in a classroom, because they create that certainty of situation, which is so important for students and all sorts and types of students. If we then think about what a good script is not, and what it shouldn't kind of be reduced to, as it were. So Tom Bennett would argue that a good script is not a straitjacket, and it shouldn't replace sincerity or professionalism, but it should be a scaffold for this. And one way of thinking about it is, if you use a script to ring a parent, for example, when you're interacting with that parent, though you should have those stock phrases ready for what you want to say and making sure those key points are made. But actually, it's so important to listen to what the parent is saying and to feel their emotion and their reaction, and tend to adapt your script. So say, for example, you're speaking to a particularly difficult parent that's particularly angry, sticking to your script is fine, but you may feel that it's appropriate to, shorten your script and actually end the conversation. Equally, if you speak to a parent who, is very emotional and is asking for help from you and seeking comfort and support, it wouldn't be appropriate to carry on robotically going through your script, but actually using your professional judgment to make a decision about, how you adapt what you're going to say, so that you can help and support that parent and allow them to work with you. So those 2 points are really important. There's a fine line between repeating the script and sticking to those key points, to also using your professional judgment about how you deliver that message, and when to curb it short or when to elaborate on it and support the parent or the student. Okay, so just some things to think about there about how you deliver those scripts, and what a good script is and what a good script should avoid being. And then finally, to support that, I just want to draw your attention to some important considerations that are made, particularly by Paul Dix, I should say, that back up the points that we've just made about thinking, not scripts not being a straitjacket and not being read out robotically. And Paul Dix in particular talks about the fact that, as well as thinking very carefully and planning what you're going to say and what you're going to do, it's really important to think about the tone in which you say it, but also the posture and the stance. Okay, so we all know that body language is half of the way that we communicate, and children and parents pick up on this very quickly. So actually working on your tone of voice, practicing it, and also thinking about your posture and stance, particularly if you're dealing with a situation that is quite difficult, that's quite emotional, thinking about the way that you moderate your tone of voice and the way you stand and your body language is going to be equally as important as what you say and what you then decide to do. Okay, and I provided you with some reading from Paul Dix, where he goes into this in a bit more detail about, what you should and shouldn't do, and how do you, and things to think about when you are deciding on your script and delivering your script to students, to parents, and to other members of staff. So just some important considerations there from Paul Dix about how to deliver your script. Now, before I ask you to work collaboratively on some scripts, what I wanted to do is just give you some examples of scripts. So the first one is one that has already really been shared with everybody. But what I've done is I've broken it down so that we can look at the actual scripted words and the actions associated with that. And the second example is one from Paul Dix, and it's called a 30-second script, or a 30-second interaction that can be used in multiple situations. So if I start with the first one, so it's the script that is attached to our STAR transitions. So this was introduced to you in December, and I think Emma modelled this with everybody in December about how some of the stock phrases that can be used to deliver a STAR transition, and obviously, you know, these can be moved around depending on the class and depending on the situation, but there are some certain stock phrases that you want to fall back on when you are delivering the STAR transitions. So if we think about the first series of stock phrases, so the blue are the phrases that you will want to use in your script, and then the black are the stock actions, I should say, or the stock behaviors that you want to be exhibiting when you are delivering that interaction. So here we're talking about positive verbal cues. So these are positive stock phrases. So if we think about the first one, so, you know, we'd start by saying STAR behavior in 3, sitting up straight. And then the behavior that is associated with that is you would pause, you'd scan the room, and then you'd rest your eyes momentarily on each student whilst you say that. And that will then be repeated for the next 2 phrases. So 2, pens on desk, all eyes tracking me or the board. 1, respecting through silence. And at each phase, or at each phrase, you'd have your stock behaviors that you will want to do as you're delivering that phrase. So those would be the key phrases you want to use when you're delivering STAR. Then if we then think about, you know, follow-up stock behaviors, so as you're delivering this and you're pausing and you're scanning the room and momentarily resting your eyes on every student, you may want to then use some non-verbal cues, some stock non-verbal cues, to remind students to comply with STAR during each bit of your instruction. So that might be finger to the ear to show that students need to be listening, or one to the eye for eye contact, or to the lips to show respecting through silence. So it's things that you've planned that you're going to use in every STAR transition interaction. And then if we think about how some other stock phrases and behaviors that you might want to use. So if students start talking when you're talking, we advise everybody, don't start talking over them, but use a self-interrupt phrase. Something like, I've almost got everyone with me, haven't got quite 100%. And you could be using that repeatedly all the way through your STAR interaction, okay, with a pause to wait for students to actually comply with your instructions. And then finally, thinking about praising those students who are following STAR and then challenging anonymously. And Emma talked about the importance of challenging anonymously and not using students' names. So stock phrases such as, thank you for those of you who are sitting up straight, or tracking me, or respecting through silence, and still waiting for some of us, still waiting for a few students, still waiting for 1 or 2 students at the back to do X, Y, and Z. So that's just an example of some of the phrases and the behaviors that we should be using when we are delivering STAR, and that we can fall back on when we are actually trying to attract students' attention between episodes of teaching. If I just now share with you an example of a scripted interaction by Paul Dix, so this is an example of his 30-second script, and he suggests that you could probably use this in lots of different situations, both within the lesson and outside the lesson, and it can be adapted to suit your needs. So it starts with 3 stock phrases, which go along the lines of, I noticed you are, and then identify the thing that you've noticed or the problem that you've noticed. It was the rule about, or it was the routine that we established, or we all agreed that we would do, and then you'd identify the rule or the routine or the agreement that has been infringed or broken. And then you'd go on to say, you have chosen to, and then you'd actually nominate the action from the student. So I noticed you are, identify the problem. It was the routine, the rule, the expectation that we all agreed, identify that. And then you have chosen to nominate the behavior of the student. And then that gets followed up with a positive reminder. So this is really important. Paul Dix puts a lot of emphasis on this, and he talks about the positive reminder. Do you remember last week or last lesson when you, and then identify a positive instance that you have for that student or the student's behavior. That is, name of the student, who I need to see today. So a reminder that you've seen that student behave appropriately, and that's the student you want to actually see today. And then the interaction finishes with, thank you for listening, and then you walk away. And then Paul Dix argues that this gives the student some take-up time. So 3 very distinct parts of that interaction: identify the problem, identify the routine that's been broken, identify the way in which the student has broken that routine, remind them of when they've adhered to that routine or been good, catch them being good, and then give them take-up time. And Paul Dix would argue that that script can be used in lots of different difficult interactions within a particular lesson if adapted. So that's a little bit of input in terms of what a script is, why we should use them, and what it could look like and what it should not look like. So for the rest of today's session, what I'd like you to do are 2 things. One of them I'd like you to do collaboratively in your subject areas. And then the second one I'd like you to do individually. And before we revisit this later on down in the term. So the first thing I'd like you to do collaboratively this afternoon, and I'd like you to spend 20-30 minutes on this, is I'd like you to consider all the possible classroom circumstances or interactions that you come across that you think would really benefit from a script. Okay, so you can either do this individually first and then share, or as a department, make a decision about all the different interactions that you've come across in your lessons that you think, actually, I could really do with a script for that. Then what I'd like you to do is think about some of the stock phrases and behaviors, I should say, that you've used or you could use successfully in each of those situations. So think about what Paul Dix and Tom Bennett have said about what makes a good script and the length of them and how it should be delivered. Make a list of those stock phrases and actions that you could use within those particular situations. And then using those, try to create at least 2 scripts that you could use this week. And I'd love some feedback on those and some examples of scripts that people have used or are hoping to use this week. So that's the bulk of what I'd like you to do this afternoon in your curriculum areas. At the end of today, or in between today and our next session on this in a couple of weeks' time, what I'd like you to do is have a go at reading chapter 6 of Paul Dix, When the Adults Change, Everything Changes, which has been attached to this PowerPoint, or it'll be popped in your trays. And the chapter is entitled Universal Microscripts, Flipping the Script. And in particular, there are 2 parts of it that I'd really like you to focus on. So page 92 and 95 provides detail of the 30-second script, which I shared with you earlier. And then the last few pages, Paul Dix gives examples of chunked phrases that can be used to create a script. So it might be a really good thing to refer to this afternoon if you're thinking about situations that you would like to use a script for. So good luck with that. And we are going to revisit this in a few weeks' time, and think about how scripts, what scripts we've developed and how they've helped us, and what potential scripts we might want to develop as a whole school to actually use in more common interactions across all of our lessons. Okay, thank you very much for listening.